Hey, it's AbsolX Guardian and welcome back to my channel. This isn't the video I was teasing at the end of my Mimic video. Instead, what happened is that when I was engaging in one of my non-FNaF interests, esotericism, and listening to a podcast interview with Dr. Shannon Grimes, she offhandedly mentioned the concept of the alchemical marriage between King Sun and Queen Moon, where they fused together to produce the Philosopher's Stone, which I immediately connected to Moon.exe. I started to overlay the little bit I knew about alchemy onto Moon.exe, and things began to click. So, I cracked open Alchemy and Mysticism by Alexander Rube, an introductory text I was recommended for learning about the symbolic language used by Western alchemists, mostly in the early modern period. Was the key to understanding Moon.exe inside? Well, not quite. But I did find a few pieces of symbolism in the program that I think are references to alchemy, similar to how Jackie being defeated by the Rainy Day Boot is a reference to a supposed origin for Jack-in-the-Boxes, drawing from a story where a prelate trapped the devil in a boot. The structure for Moon.exe is the same as an alchemical text, with the putting back together of M2 being the equivalent of making the Philosopher's Stone. Unlike my last video, this isn't a full-fledged research project. I'm only drawing from Alchemy and Mysticism and the general knowledge of alchemy I've picked up over time. I could have done more research, but it's probably a good idea to avoid getting too far into the weeds here. Fiction is full of surface-level alchemical symbolism, so attempting to untangle the extremely complex actual history of alchemy is probably unnecessary. I'm also not going to be citing my sources as thoroughly, but I will be including page numbers from Alchemy and Mysticism in this video, as well as any other sources I did end up consulting. If you'd like me to elaborate on sourcing for anything I say in this video, all you have to do is ask in the comments. As a bonus thing, while most of the symbolism explained by Alchemy and Mysticism was irrelevant to Five Nights at Freddy's, the concept of philosophical Mercury actually tracks very well to Remanent, something that it is said to resemble, and making that connection actually provides a very useful framework for thinking of Remanent and Agony as separate things. Unlike most of the series that are inspired by alchemy, it hasn't been explicitly referenced by FNaF. The only exception is that the track that plays in the security puppet minigame is called Alchemist's Fantasy. I've seen other people make the connection between that name and William's quest for eternal life, as an Alchemist's Fantasy would be the creation of the Philosopher's Stone and thus the elixir of life. But as I'll describe later, there are more similarities between the magnum opus and attempts to bring people back to life in this series than just the ultimate goal. My hope is that, even without specific references, I'm able to demonstrate that things line up so well that my conclusions are useful. Additionally, the inspirations that have been specifically cited by the series have been inspired by alchemy. It seems like every fifth thing in the series is a reference to Frankenstein, and in the original novel, Victor Frankenstein's interest in the mysteries of the universe is sparked by finding alchemical texts. His motivation to find a way to create life is to complete the work that the alchemists couldn't before their tradition was swept away by the scientific revolution. Victor may have been relying on the scientific knowledge of his time, but by temperament he was more alchemist than modern scientists. We also have Emanuel Swedenborg, who was the first modern thinker to propose the idea that the soul was a physical substance, inspired by the alchemical theories of a few centuries previously. His idea of a vital fluid was later picked up by 19th century spiritualists in the New Age movement. What he proposes is literally what Remanent is. The field is a concept taken wholesale from the New Age pseudoscience of quantum mysticism. It is the great-grandchild of alchemy, drawing from traditions inspired by alchemy, such as those aforementioned 19th century spiritualists and Jungian psychology. I have read the works of Lynn McTaggart, books which almost certainly directly inspired FNaF. As an aside, the only reason I haven't made a video on them is that there is so much potentially relevant information, I have no idea how to organize one. The way she talks about things, especially when she rails against mainstream science for having a view of the world that is cold and mechanical, gave me a sense that her and her colleagues' interpretation of quantum physics is an unknowing attempt to reverse the change of mindset between alchemy and modern science. I don't know what you called science fiction based on imagining what would happen if pseudoscience was real, but whatever it is, both quantum mysticism and alchemy are examples of it. What actual historical alchemy was is complicated. This is a tradition that lasted for and evolved over centuries, and the historiography on the topic is still rather muddled. For our purposes, you can keep your pop culture idea of what an alchemist is, except that the creation of the Philosopher's Stone, the process of which involved turning lead into gold and could generate the elixir of life, was also a method for achieving enlightenment. Here we are specifically looking at the mystical alchemical tradition of early modern Europe. When they described alchemical processes in their texts, alchemists use seemingly bizarre mythological analogies. There are multiple purposes for this. One was that it was a way to encode their methods so that only practitioners of their same tradition could understand the literal instructions they were giving. Another was that this was a form of personification for describing chemical reactions. We still do the exact same thing when we do things like talk about atoms wanting to have 8 valence electrons. And then there's the view that alchemists, at least the most prominent ones, were mystics. These are instructions for doing magic and connecting with the divine. Regardless of the historicity of this view, it is the one that has influenced the use of alchemical symbolism in contemporary media. To start with understanding mystical alchemy, it descends from Hermeticism, which gave us the phrase as above, so below, to explain how the spiritual and the physical worlds mirror each other, or, to put it another way,
everything that happens out there has an effect here.
Alchemy is also based on Neoplatonism and monism. To heavily simplify this, Neoplatonism posits the existence of the One, an indescribable source of all reality and knowledge. When believed by those who are also of an Abrahamic religion, the One is the answer to the question of where God comes from. Ultimately, the mundane and spiritual, the physical and mental, all are of one original nature. By studying philosophy and mysticism, one could become closer to the One. This was the enlightenment that was achieved by making a philosopher's stone. This is essentially what the field is, especially when described by Lynn McTaggart. Viewing Moon.exe with the lens of it being an occult text is the journey the POV character, who is perhaps even M2 himself, takes to set M2 into a David-only state, removing the disharmony causing him to kill everyone. Turning base metals into gold brought them closer to the One, putting them back together in a way. The creation of the Philosopher's Stone was achieved by combining opposites, personified by the marriage and fusion of King Sun and Queen Moon to create the androgynous rebus, which is exactly what happens in Moon.exe. In this framework, every single thing we do in Moon.exe affects something in the flip side. We simply have to decode the symbolism. Turning M2 into David also fulfills pop culture's most prominent idea of the purpose of the Philosopher's Stone, providing eternal life. By completing Moon.exe, at the very least from M1's perspective, we have brought David perfectly back from the dead. One set of instructions for the magnum opus even uses the imagery of the pelican bringing its dead young, which represent the base metals, back to life to represent one of the steps. Being able to cheat death is also William's ultimate goal with his Remanent experiments. Wait, but everything I just said is already the fandom consensus about how Moon.exe works, which theorists have figured out from actually playing the game. That's the point. The fact that Moon.exe maps so perfectly onto an alchemical text describing the magnum opus provides evidence that we can use alchemical symbolism to draw conclusions about the program. The first piece of alchemical symbolism is on the first screen of the program. Of the planet Mobile hanging above the POV character's bed, only Saturn is actually depicted in detail. As the furthest planet known at the time, Saturn is associated with the most base of metals, lead. The magnum opus is the process of traveling through the celestial bodies recognized by alchemy, starting with Saturn. Saturn is associated with time and thus death. We are starting our journey from death in Saturn's realm, from a profane world ruled by death to one of eternal life. The fact that there are only 4 indistinct planets is also consistent with alchemy. Earth wasn't a celestial body, and Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto had yet to be discovered. Sun and Moon were also celestial bodies, but those are accounted for within Moon.exe. So, the 4 indistinct planets are Venus, Mercury, Mars, and Jupiter. I couldn't think of a way to get to that number when starting from an actual 1970s 9-planet solar system model. Unfortunately, I couldn't figure out a way to divide Moon.exe into any of the presented steps of the magnum opus in Alchemy and Mysticism, not the 12 astrological signs, the 4 colors, or the 7 celestial bodies, which just reinforces the idea that the bulk of the symbolism is FNaF specific. The next symbolic connection I've made is more tenuous. One of the primary sources included in Alchemy and Mysticism describes under the ground as where base metals mature towards perfection, with mines being a kind of womb of the world. The same source also presents the sun and moon as givers of life. The cave is where we put the statue of Moon back together, rebirthing it, and then are possibly reborn ourselves. On the other hand, it could relate more to the fact that the parts of the game underground are the ones with the most supernatural stuff going on. In Moon.exe, Sun and Moon have their genders swapped from their traditional Western personifications. However, the traits associated with femininity and masculinity by alchemy better match Edwin and Fiona respectively. Just like how the moon changes its shape each night, the feminine is associated with changeability, as well as inspiration and imagination, especially its fleeting nature. This imagination was essential for performing alchemy and other crafts. This fits Edwin's unreliability far better than Fiona. While the masculine was reliability and stability, it was needed to regulate the feminine. This better fits the role Fiona played in Edwin's life, especially when she was alive. It was known even back during the Renaissance that the moon reflected the sun's light. Fiona was the metaphorical light of Edwin's life, and when she died, he lost that source of life, which was also something Renaissance alchemists knew about the sun. Edwin's characterization better aligns with the moon and alchemical feminine, while Fiona matches with the sun and the alchemical masculine, which is why the personifications in Moon.exe have genders matching their corresponding characters instead of their traditional personifications. That is everything of substance I found that relates to Moon.exe, but I'm not done. While Mercury had its own place in the procession of metals, so-called philosophical Mercury was extremely important. Sometimes called azoth, it was the universal solvent alchemists sought, and according to Paracelsus, a panacea. It was the waters of life and essential for all metals. This is relevant for our purposes because the main visual description of Remanent is bubbling liquid mercury. So what happens if we cast Remanent in the role of philosophical Mercury? It fits surprisingly well. Not only does it have the properties of healing both humans and metal, but Paracelsus invented a concept called the tria prima, or the three primes, to complement the four classical elements. This was the mercurial and feminine mercury, the combustible and masculine sulfur, and the solid salt. This was also mapped onto people. Salt corresponded to the body, Mercury the mind, sometimes translated as spirit, the source of higher reason and imagination, and sulfur, the soul, the seat of emotions. In FNaF specifically, both Remanent and Agony contain memory and thus some of the self, but under this, Remanent is a whole consciousness, while Agony is just the echo of emotions. The Monty within introduces the same idea of split consciousness between hemispheres in a brain, with one being the actual consciousness. While the idea of an AI sounds very unemotional, Kane's main point is assigning it to negative self-talk and pattern recognition, processes that are very much driven by emotion rather than higher reasoning. As a bonus, the Paracelsian view of life is described as a process of destruction by fire, which certainly fits with the rules of Remanent. Additionally, using heat to free the pure elements from raw material is characterized as using fire to set the spiritual free from the mundane. The idea of existence requiring three components is actually something Taggart, the guy we even get the concept of agony from, proposes. When creating the Stitch Wraith, he combines an animatronic, salt, with agony, sulfur, and an artificial intelligence, mercury. When you don't have any remnant from actual dead people, you need to provide an artificial mind as a substitute. Agony provides the spark of personhood and allows computer programs to transcend their hardware limitations. In the series' main possessions, agony is naturally also generated upon death, so all that is needed is a body to control. This also explains why Baby and Sister location seems to have a level of conflict and internal division with the AI of the animatronic, but the Stitch Wraith doesn't. Elizabeth has a mind to come into conflict with the AI already present, but Andrew and Jake can only think because they're using the provided artificial intelligence as a medium to do so, and in their case, there are no programmed instructions for that AI to follow. This also means that Trilogy Elizabeth isn't flat out wrong when she says that she has a soul and Charlie doesn't. It makes more sense that she isn't an unreliable narrator here, as she has experienced absorbing a quote soul and remembers what it was like before she had one. Although the fact she actually talks about having more emotions would have to be because of either the extra agony Elizabeth provided or because Remanent is a better medium for consciously understanding complex emotions than the incomplete AI the fourth Charlie had. Protagonist Charlie is capable of feeling emotions, if somewhat blunted. All this doesn't actually provide any evidence for Remanent and Agony being separate things. But if that is something you already believe because of the evidence actually in FNaF, the Tria Prima provides a system for explaining how they function as separate things. I've previously stated that Agony and Remnant had to be the same thing, just with properties that vary depending on how they're produced. It was the only thing that made sense to me. But the Tria Prima is another system that makes sense, and so now I'm not so sure. Well, that's Alchemy and FNaF. It's not as all-explaining as it is in other Alchemy-based series, but I hope I helped you understand some of the series' metaphysics. I know Alchemy has never been explicitly referenced the way it usually is in a series that takes inspiration from it, but I hope I've proven its relevance. It has certainly changed how I look at the series. As always, comments are what I appreciate the most, so I can discuss anything that I've mentioned in this video with other people. The video I was actually planning on making after my Mimic video is still in the works. Don't worry. Absol out.